All right.
Cool. Well, thank you all for coming. Tim, this is the Why We Will Win Training for Trainers video. I'm going to be facilitating this session, and Tim is going to be playing the role of the participant. So let's go ahead and dive in. There's a little bit of pre-reading for this session that we'll go over, but I just wanted to point out that it'd be great if you read chapters 4 and 6 of This is an Uprising. It'll help you understand this material a lot better. Cool. So the objectives of this session is to, we're going to examine the questions why we will win and how we will win, and we have 3 main objectives. Understand our power to overturn unjust systems through non-cooperation. Learn the term social power to describe this understanding of power. And review the 4 stages of Seize the Grid and work together to envision the actions of non-cooperation in each phase. So there are 2 different ways to do the first aspect of this training, the anchor part. You can either do this with chairs or with paper. So if you are going to do it with chairs, that means that you're in a space with lots of chairs or other large things you can stack, and you're not worried about those things getting broken, or they're pretty sturdy, or you feel good about that, and you have enough room to do an activity where you'll be stacking chairs and making them fall. If you do it with paper, then you maybe have a little bit less space and not those same resources. And we recommended you do it with chairs because it's like a really cool activity, but paper works well too. So either way, first thing you do is you pose this question and you write out the answers on a piece of Post-it flip chart paper. So Tim, who are the people and groups in our country that hold the most resources and control?
Let me see. I think, like I was just I was reading today about the appeals court ruling on Donald Trump's Muslim ban. So I think people in the government and also people in the court system, and also rich people.
Yeah, definitely. Those are all great answers. CEOs, the president, Congress, those who hold privileged identities, those are the people who are in power and have the most resources in our society. So as a trainer, we'll write these on a piece of flip chart paper and hang it up. So then you're going to pose the second question. So Tim, how do these people come into and maintain these resources and control?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot about how Europeans came over to the US a long time ago, and they took the land from native people who were living here already, and they enslaved people, and they built up a lot of wealth over time.
Yeah, those are all great answers. And just to further think about that a little bit more, how are these systems implemented and how are they maintained? And what are some examples for how these things that happened, these systems come to express power and dominance in our society?
How are they created? Well, people make laws to protect what they have, and people with power ultimately are trying to do whatever they can to hold on to that power. So a lot of different decisions have been made that have kept some folks on top and everybody else on the bottom.
Yeah, there's a real systemic thing going on here to do that. That's exactly right. So remember your answers there as we go into the last question here. Cool. So the last question, what institution, groups, and structures must exist in the world in order for these people to maintain resources and control? So in this, like, think about specific institutions we can name, not just like the systems, like laws, but like what is it? What is the body that creates laws, and like what are the like institutions we can name that uphold these systems?
The courts. I said that one earlier.
Courts, government, yeah. What else?
Um, um, banks and like the way that like banks like loan money, but then they like take money from people that they loan money to, and that money goes up the top. Um,
Yeah, for sure. What are some institutions that you take part of like in everyday life that might do that? Like maybe you're a student or maybe you go to church. Like would those be those might be some other places like educational institutions or religious institutions that uphold these same things.
yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, because they're like setting a cultural standard.
Cool. So as a trainer, um, you'll take these answers and you'll write them into pieces of flip chart paper, maybe like cut lengthwise, and you'll draw pillars on them, and you'll write just one thing in each of these pillars, and this will come into play. So the next activity is going to be very interactive. So if you're doing with chairs, you're going to want to have the persons build a pyramid out of chairs. So this is pretty basic, like 3 chairs on the bottom, 2 chairs, and then 1 chair, or whatever you can see fit. But like, don't make it too big. Don't want to hurt anyone here. And then go over again the things that we've written out on flip chart paper. So read out the people in power and paste them on the chair at the very top of the pyramid. And then read out the institutions that that support those in power, those pillars that we did, and paste them onto the lower chairs like they might be pillars of a building. And if you're doing this with paper, you will have already been filling this in a triangle. So you'll initially start by like writing everything at the top, and then be writing what the pillars are on drawn in pillars on a triangle. Does that make sense to you, Tim?
I think so. Yeah, maybe we can show people the next slide as like an example.
Yeah, for sure. So this is what it'll look like on paper, and this is also will be in your slides to have like a more concrete view of it. But if you so if you're doing your chairs, so or if you're doing the paper, the next question to ask is, what would happen to the people at the top if these institutional pillars were no longer supporting them? So Tim, what do you think would happen?
So like if like the banks and the courts and the educational institutions and the churches weren't propping them up, I think that they wouldn't have power anymore. They wouldn't be able to maintain control over everyone.
Exactly, that's exactly right. As movement organizers, it's their job to compel people making up these pillars to withdraw their consent and support. And the strategy that we're about to learn about was constructed to allow us to do just that. And then in this moment, you can have a volunteer pull out a chair and watch the pyramid crumble, which is a great moment.
Can you say more about that? What is that? So like a volunteer pulls out a chair from where?
From the bottom of the pyramid, or whatever, depending on the solidness of your pyramid construction, you can use your own discretion. But like pulling out those pillars from the bottom will hopefully let the whole pyramid crumble. So yeah, that's exactly right.
Cool.
So this is going to be going over that same thing again, but Tim, traditionally, who do we, the public, think has the power to change things in our society in a traditional view of it?
Yeah, well, we talked about before, it's like we think of like the CEOs and the presidents, people at the very top.
Yeah. So based on the last exercise we did, who do you think sees the grid believes has the power to change things in our society?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's just seize the grid, right? I think it's just the case, right? Like if we don't go along with what the people at the top want us to do, then they don't have any power anymore. Like
That's exactly right.
they say something that we're going to do it, but if enough of us refuse to do it, they can't maintain that control.
Heck yeah. Awesome. So looking at these pillars on the board here, uh, what do these institutions need in order to function? Who and what keeps these institutions running?
Well, we talked about how like people need to be involved. Um, I mean, obviously they like need our money, right? Like if these are all of them are, if they're a private business, they need people to shop there. If it's a public thing like the police or like a public educational system, they need tax dollars.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They need tax
Churches,
dollars,
they need our
donations,
donations.
employees, volunteers. Yeah, that's right. So now that we know what they need from us, what power do we have over these institutions? How can we really show our power?
I think we can like withhold those things. We can withhold our participation. We can stop shopping at places that are doing stuff we don't believe in. We can stop donating money to organizations that are doing stuff we don't believe in. I guess we could stop paying our taxes.
Yeah, non-compliance,
Yeah.
withholding our support. That's exactly what it is. Um, so most people in institutions in our society view power as monolithic, in that you can see that's a new word, but here it's the people at the top of the pyramid. But seize the grid, and as you mentioned, lots of people believe in social power, which is the belief that the people at the bottom hold the power. So in order to change the system, we must withdraw our implicit and our explicit consent from these unjust systems. Cool. Let's take a little bit of a look what it looks like. This is our true source of our power. Organized people who are all actively support our movement. A social view of power says that we have the power to steer the course of our society. So Tim, do you believe me when I say this? How is it true that we could have the power?
Sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think this is hitting the point home a lot of it. So use your discretion. But I think more specifically, like, do you like buy that this is the truth? I think you might buy.
Heck yeah. I mean, like, yeah, absolutely. I definitely buy this. People like, people we assume that people at the top of a system have power, but that's all predicated on us doing what they say we should do.
Yeah. So we have this power because we, as the workers, students, children, parents, and participants in our society, we make the society run. If we don't believe in the direction of things, we can express our power through non-cooperation. So, for example, if a factory is poisoning drinking water, and the CEO knows it and allows it to allow it to happen, what can the workers of a company do? What are like some specific steps they could take?
I mean, they could work really slowly. That'd be like a really gentle thing to do. They could say that they won't like attend like staff meetings until a change happens. They could organize in their union and take action that way. Say that the union won't participate with the company. They could just stay home from work, take a sick day all together.
Yeah, those are great, like all methods of non-compliance. And if anybody and if any of your participants says something that it sounds more like monolithic power, like talking to the CEO or like trying to have a negotiation there, like point that out and say that sounds like monolithic view of power there. So we have this power and we have had it all along. And every second we're allowing someone else to make a bad decision for us, we're giving that power away. So that was a great job. We just like went right through that view of power. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the cycle of momentum. So this cycle will propel us for our 4-phase plan of Seize the Grid. So we just learned about activate, which is that we know we will need massive amounts of people to join our movement in order to topple those pillars that uphold the unjust systems. And by massive amounts, I mean like really massive. To reach a tipping point, we need millions of people standing with us. There's a study of social movements by a researcher named Erica Chenoweth who shows that 3.5% of a population engaged in active support, activated into a movement, that's when change happens. That's no small task. Do you know what 3.5% of the population is, Tim?
Let me just do the math really fast. Let's see. So there are 300 million people in the U.S. So like 1% would be like, I'm doing it, and that's 11 million people, I think, right?
Yeah, you're right. It is 11 million people, which is a lot of people, but totally doable. 11 million is the entire population of Ohio, to give you some sense of that. But if you look around the country, a lot of people are getting activated in this moment for justice and equity. Seize the Grid doesn't need to activate 11 million people by ourselves. We need to contribute to a bigger movement, bringing our issue and our people to the fight for systemic change.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's great. So that's just one part of the cycle of momentum. To explain the other two parts, and so that's activate. That's our goal, is to get this massive amount of people to non-cooperate, to topple the pillars and get what we want. But in order to sustain that and get to that, we have to have a couple of things. One of those things is trainings. Trainings and community building events are a very important part of integrating people into our movement. If we're going to sustain our movement, we need to build organizations that can sustain people's engagement, not just turn people out in the street. And then the last part is escalation. Escalate is the last, by escalation we mean actions that work together in a movement that help to motivate the public to join our cause. These actions will become more and more visible and more disruptive by making sure that that down the road in our campaign, everyone has to take a notice and take a stand on our issue. Yeah.
Can I make a quick note here?
Yeah.
All right, this is me wearing my like Tim the Trainer hat. But can you go back a slide?
Yeah.
One thing that I think it may be helpful as a really concrete way to think about this too is that, Seize the Grid campaign communities are taking actions to escalate, right? That they're really visible to the public. They're getting more people to pay attention. And then they're activating people by like disrupting business as usual, getting people just to notice what's going on, but also like finding ways to sign them up and get their information and find ways to plug them in. So you can use this as an opportunity to highlight that an action isn't successful if it hasn't found a way to capture those folks and let them know how they can get involved. So that might be like having people sign a pledge and then following up with them. It might be saying, hey, we're having a training this weekend. It might be people like building relationships done in there. But I want to name that.
Absolutely. That's right. Yeah. So to think a little bit more about what these actions will look like at each of these phases, there are two aspects of actions that we believe work together to escalate a campaign to engage the number of people we want to win. So the first part is, you can see, but in the real slide, it actually clicks, so you can't see disruption or sacrifice in the beginning. So note that as a trainer. So you can click once and you'll see first is disruption. So Tim, why would an action that disrupts business as usual be strategic for our campaign?
It gets people to pay attention.
Yeah, exactly. It forces people to take a stand. And because we're targeting the public, we have to go where the public will see us and call upon them to take that stand. But can you think of any downsides to a disruptive tactic? Have you seen any backlash to disruptive tactics?
Yeah, definitely. In Minneapolis, when Black Lives Matter blocked the major highway through town, people were really pissed. They were like, why are they doing this? Like, people are being made late for work. They're like, people are trying to maybe get to the hospital. This is dangerous.
Definitely. Yeah. So what might we do to create actions that are disruptive but don't invite as much of a negative response? How do we cultivate sympathy for our cause?
I don't know. I guess we just got to be like really like tell a really good story.
Yeah. So maybe pushing you a little bit more here. When you maybe are on Facebook or on YouTube and or maybe you're watching TV and like an ad comes up and it's like playing that sad music and like you're hearing a really like story that like really like moves you. Like what are some things that you see in that story?
I think I like see people that I can relate to.
And do those people like have they had like just perfect lives, or have they like had to go through hardships? Have they had to sacrifice?
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. Like that, there are people that I can relate to, and I can tell that like they're dealing with something that's really hard, and like they wouldn't like that must be what's going on.
Yeah. So we're getting closer to what we think the next part of an important action to escalate is, and that's personal sacrifice. So trainers can click the next button, but by showing others the seriousness of our commitment, we can win sympathy. So researchers of social movements tell us that movements are primed to flare up when participants demonstrate the seriousness of their commitment. The one main way of doing this is through showing a willingness to endure hardship, to face arrest, or even risk physical harm in dramatizing an injustice. Personal sacrifice allows us to illuminate the injustice of the moment. When participants must ask themselves how much are they willing to sacrifice for a cause, clarifies their values and strengthens their commitment. It can become a moment of personal transformation. Within successful social movements, organizers constantly ask members to make sacrifices. Nonviolent confrontations can often involve making such sacrifices visible, creating scenarios in which those involved can publicly convey their seriousness of purpose. And a common misconception about nonviolent action is that it is necessarily focusing on touching the heart of the opponent and leading to conversation. Because really, the impact of sacrifice has little to do with changing the views of one's opponent, and has more to do with affecting one's friends. When people decide to risk their safety or face arrest, their decisions have an effect of mobilizing the communities closest to them. So, disruption and sacrifice together, we believe, creates escalated actions. So, in escalation, it's most important to come up with. It's not important to come up with just a single action that can do it all. It has to be a conceived a string of actions of nonviolent resistance that creates a sense of heightening drama. To sustain a long struggle, you can't just employ one tactic. So actions that contain sacrifice and disruption motivate people to join our movement, and sequencing actions in an escalated order builds our movement so that people have the power they need to win. So this is why, getting back to SSC, or Seize the Grid, this is why we've broken our national movement up into 4 phases. And we're going to dive into that more soon. Does that make sense? That was a lot of talking on my part, but are you understanding that, Tim?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Rad.
I want to make a special public service announcement here too, just a reminder to folks, and you can find whatever way to include this in your training that feels right, but just so folks are clear, the Sierra Club still has a standing policy against doing actions that break the law. So we do want to encourage people to participate in nonviolent non-cooperation, but seek ways to do that that are lawful.
Yeah. Yeah. And this text is from This Is an Uprising, which is a great book. You should all read it. So for the next slide, I just want to give a trigger warning that we're going to be discussing and viewing some images of police brutality, but the images are not graphic. So move on to that. So my question for you, Tim, is where were these photos taken and what is happening in them?
Yeah, I totally remember these photos. Yeah, this is from the Standing Rock protests of the last year.
Yeah, exactly. Can you tell a little bit about what was happening in Standing Rock?
Yeah, there was a pipeline that was proposed. I mean, this issue has really flared up again recently, but a pipeline that was scheduled to go underneath the main source of drinking water for a Native community in North Dakota, the Standing Rock Sioux, and the tribal leadership put out a call for folks to join them in standing up against the pipeline. And so folks came from all around the country and organized in strategic nonviolent non-cooperation to prevent the pipeline from moving forward.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and we have a resource here for trainers to read a little bit more about the pipeline, but also just it's like a hot news item right now, so we encourage folks to do a little bit of independent research on that. But next question is, how is this an example of disruption, sacrifice, and escalation?
Yeah, I mean, I know that people disrupted because they so many things are about it were disruptive. Just the number of cars on the road heading up there was disruptive to things that were happening. People would pray on or near the construction site, on the roads. Those were all disruptive. And then, the police coming in and forcibly removing people, that was came with a big amount of sacrifice. And as things went on, more and more people came, so it escalated, and just the sheer number of people allowed them to escalate, and then more police came, and more attention was paid to it, and the media started showing up, and then veterans were coming in to participate in the protests from all over the place, and then people all around the country started taking action locally and pulling money from banks. Okay.
That was a great picture you painted, but that's exactly right. Great way to explain the disruption, sacrifice, and escalation. Cool. So we're gonna move on to the phases. So this is how our campaign is gonna escalate. So what does all of this mean for us working for a just and equitable energy system? So what does it look like for us to withdraw our consent from this unjust energy system? So we're going to move through this together as a movement, building our sphere of influence until we get enough people who are involved that we can't be ignored. So for each of these phases, we have a goal and some target audiences, and also some symbolic targets, or those pillars that we were talking about earlier. So our audience is expanding so that we can reach that 3.5% number that we mentioned before, that we know we need to win the change that we want. We're starting with youth in phase 1 because we believe that young people have the vision and drive to create the new world that we need. And then we expand out to many more audiences that make up the pillar we mentioned before. By phase 4, we know we will have a mass number of people we need to break down the pillars and create change. Tim, would you feel good about reading off the goals of each phase?
Sure. Phase 1. Seize the Grid launches on high school and college campuses. Students call upon administrators to cut ties with utilities which burn fossil fuels and exploit our communities.
So we see that the pillars for that are the administration, leadership of high school, colleges, and universities. So go ahead.
Cool. For phase 2, expand Seize the Grid to include adults, and demonstrate that utilities are exploiting marginalized people and standing in the way of real climate solutions. Government agencies in charge of regulating utilities are giving them a free pass to endanger our well-being.
Yeah, so that symbolic target is the utility in the government agencies that enable them. So do you want to read 3?
Sure. Erode the moral and financial standing of the corporate and cultural institutions that continue to support utilities that burn fossil fuels and exploit our communities.
Yeah, so both our symbolic targets and our target audience has expanded here. So we're now, our symbolic target are corporation, educational and religious institution, membership nonprofits, financial institutions, and we're engaging folks in this anywhere from consumers, parents and neighbors, young people, teachers and professors, and members of those religious and cultural institutions. Can you read 4?
Yeah. Shut down business as usual for institutions that stand in the way of a just transition to community-owned clean energy.
Yeah, so we're still then targeting corporations and governmental leadership and expanding our target audiences to business employees and labor unions and corporate shareholders. Cool. So we're going to do an activity that will let us look a little bit more at phase 1 and envision some actions that we might be doing during phase 1. So what's going to happen is you're going to break participants out into groups of 2 to 4. And so there should be at least 5 groups and no more than 10 groups. And then have groups choose roles, and it's okay if people hold more than one role. So these are our typical roles, and you can read them here. And there is also in the handout these roles for participants. So make sure you read those out so the participants know like which role they will be holding, and they should be familiar with roles from earlier in the day. So then after they've broken out into groups and chosen roles, you're going to give each group a large piece of paper with one of the following actions and a short description written on each one. And so feel free to choose the actions that you think will set your group up the best for the activity. So there's a list of actions here. You can read them. This is also on the participant handout with a short description. So this is going to be a little bit hard to describe without being in person, but I'm going to try my best. So participants are going to place their actions on a scale of disruption and sacrifice. So if your room has four walls, square. So you're going to have the opposing walls sign that say low sacrifice and high sacrifice. So on this side, low sacrifice, this side, high sacrifice. And then on the other 2 walls, you're going to post signs that say low disruption and high disruption. So this wall and this wall will be high disruption and low disruption. So you have a grid. So we've set up this grid to visualize our actions from low disruption to high disruption. You have 2 minutes, the groups have 2 minutes, to place their action on the grid. So participants will decide if their action includes a high level or a low level of disruption and a high level or low level of sacrifice. When you find your spot, have a seat with your group. And if your group needs more clarification, you can place an example action on the grid for them. And then after that, give them 2 minutes to find their spot, and even if it's not perfect. Does that make sense, Tim?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. And so just for example, like something that's not very disruptive or might not be disruptive is like a social media campaign or maybe a vigil, and that could be lower on the disruption and sacrifice scale. But something like a strike or an occupation of something, a sit-in, a pray-in, could be more higher on the sacrifice and disruption scale, just if you're trying to visualize that. So then after that process, have 2 or 3 of the group's messengers, not all of them, quickly share out why they chose to place their action where they did. And make sure to choose groups at different points of the grid so that we see some difference. And so then after they shared out, we're going to think a little bit more deeply about how to best do actions during phase 1. So we want to increase the level of disruption and sacrifice in these actions. That's going to help us to get escalate more and make better actions. So tell them you're going to spend 5 minutes, but maybe just block out 10 minutes of time just to allow some breathing room to come up with the most creative action that increases both the level of disruption and sacrifice. So also, we just wanted to define the ties that the university that you will be role-playing in. So like they're role-playing as students at your university, might be their university. So basically, this university has a contract with the utility who primarily burns coal, meaning that most of the electricity that runs your university is coming from coal-fired power plants. So yeah, and yeah, just you can name a local utility or something funny, and you can make this scenario more elaborate if you want. So then allow groups to brainstorm their action, and then after 5 to 10 minutes, bring the whole group back together, and then invite, again, each group's messenger to quickly share the highlights of their action. So then, now that they share their highlights, make sure they are paying attention during this part. They're going to, together as groups, assemble their actions into an escalated campaign. So this is not going to be perfect, and there's no like scientific way to do this, but basically they're going to stand in a line with where they think is least escalated to most escalated, so they have a nice arc of their campaign, and point out which side will be escalated and not escalated. So then once they've assembled themselves, pose the following questions. Who does this campaign target? And it's a trick question because all of the campaigns should be targeting the public. And point out when the actions do this or not. And ask them, could you envision this campaign playing out on your campus? And maybe what was difficult about the exercise? Does that make sense, Tim, if you're still there?
Yeah, I'm still here, and I think it makes sense. Sounds like a great activity.
Awesome. Great. So you're nearly done. Okay, also I just want to point out what was on the slide, which is phase 1, just more specifically, and you can point out that this along with all the specifics of all the phases is in the participant handout of the grand strategy, but this is just going through again the goal, the key audiences, the symbolic targets, and then just a little bit more information there. But yeah. And you can have someone read that out if you want. So going to the away for a little bit of reflection. So have people sit back down and then ask them, does this view of power change the way you see social change happening in the world, and how so? So Tim, do you have an answer to that first one?
Yeah, totally. I think, if I think back on how my parents raised me, like thinking about making change, I thought it had to do with like just doing your part and asking the right people to do the right things. But yeah, the social view of power really changes how I think about things getting done. It's up to us every day to make choices about whether like good stuff or bad stuff happens.
Yeah, yep, there you go. And one more question. Can you envision some of the actions we've talked about playing out in your own community? And I know we didn't talk about any actions, but I think participants will have a great answers to that. So I think that's basically what it is. Tim, do you have anything to add to that, or thoughts or discussion?
Nope. I'll just let folks know that y'all may see some minor tweaks in the content here, just because the grand strategy is getting finalized right now, but nothing's going to be dramatically different from what you see here right now.
Rad. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us, and good luck on your training.